So I just want to get a good idea about who's in the room. Engineers? Okay, mostly all engineers. Okay, civil? Mostly civil? Okay, all civil. Okay, great. Okay, so just so I wanted to get an idea. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So I'm a principal at AHBE MIG. I'm the director of regenerative design there. AHBE MIG is a landscape architecture planning. We do have civil engineering. We do all sorts of stuff, soup to nuts. We have 15 offices, mostly on the West Coast. The only offices aren't on the West Coast are Denver and San Antonio. So about 300 people actually overall. Just a little bit of idea about my experience as well as what AHBE MIG does. This is a transit center in San Bernardino, multimodal, mostly for the Metrolink extension, as well as several buses that go into that area. We designed and put this together. I did it for a former, my last job, which was at HDR Engineering, which is a big engineering firm. This is Union Station, and the redevelop Union Station, or what will become Union Station, at least they're hoping for. So I was involved in this teaming when I was with HDR. Big, as you can imagine, the run-through tracks of trying to get the high-speed rail to be the end destination point of high-speed rail in Los Angeles was going to be here. So that was this accommodation for that. This is the largest project I ever worked on. I do other things besides transportation. This is a hospital in Abu Dhabi. It was $3.5 billion. So the landscape alone, the fee was $100 million. So this is by far the largest project that I've ever worked on. Union Station, actually, if they ever build it, will probably be in the $6 billion range. So maybe this one will eclipse this one. But this is a hospital cancer center, Cleveland Clinic out of Abu Dhabi. AHBE MIG, we're known for our parks, as well as many other things we do, but this is Johnny Carson Park in Burbank. From a sustainability point of view, it's a feeder to the LA River up there in Burbank. And it was a concrete channel, like we tend to do here in LA, right? We put concrete channels down. And so when we redid the park, we took up the channel and we put in a constructed riparian area to clean the water and filter the water before it goes into the LA River. So this is some of the work that we do, and you as civil engineers or future civil engineers will probably be, as our partner here was CWE out of Irvine? Someplace in Orange County is where they're, but they were our partner in helping us do all the calculations and understanding how the flooding would work. If you're interested in sustainability and civil engineering, this is the type of work that probably you'll be doing. This is Burbank Water and Power. It was the first CITES certified. CITES is one of the GBCI certification sessions. It's an old industrial site that we turned into an outdoor plaza for the employees. That structure used to be a pipe structure that we sort of took over to make it more of a trellis area. Lots of sustainability features in here, mostly going in terms of stormwater and drought-tolerant planting and water conservation. Another shot at that trellis structure. So it used to be a pipe structure. I don't know if you guys know these, but Burbank Water and Power had these huge pipes that went over this so you could walk under it at one point. So we completely remodeled it from that point. I am also I was one of the founders for the Los Angeles Collaborative for the Living Building Challenge. I think you had Living Building Challenge here last year. That was a referral. We are now Living Futures LA, and we have all sorts of programs, but we are considered to be the most cutting edge sustainable organizations that deal with buildings in particular and everything else. So our system, as opposed to LEED, is very difficult to get. There's only a handful around the world that actually has full certification. So it's a very difficult challenge, which is why it's called challenge. I'm also part of a think tank. It's called New American Dream, and we'll probably go into this a little bit differently, but It is specifically a think tank that talks about LA's role in suburbia and urban sprawl and transportation over the last 100 years or so. So let's get into it. Sorry about the font here. How does sustainability and transportation relate to each other? You probably had speakers already. I just wanted to go over it really quick about my thoughts about it. Okay. If you think of traditional sustainability, what you're trying to do is you're trying to collaborate among many different things. So, social, economic, environmental, and environment, all those intersections coming together is sustainable. And this was the traditional model. When we first started talking about sustainability in the early 2000s, really this is what we were talking about from an overall point of view. But it's evolved. This is the new updated model. And you can see we've gotten much more, we've drilled down much more about what these things mean, right? So not only social, but you're talking about equity, labor rights, human health and safety, cultural diversity. All of this is related to sustainability as well as economy and environment. So how we're talking about sustainability now is quite different from how we talked about it in the past, and probably quite different from how we talk about it in the future. And while I am going to talk about the past a lot, about Los Angeles in general, how many people are from Los Angeles? Oh, brothers and sisters. Yep, great. So I think you'd be very interested. People from Los Angeles, I'm specifically focused on Los Angeles and our transportation problems. So you can definitely ask questions. So this is our city, Los Angeles, right? Now what struck me, my wife and I, after La La Land, like almost everybody else, went up to Griffith Park Observatory, right? Just to hang out and take a look at it because of the views. We hadn't been there in a while. But what struck me about Griffith Park Observatory is that as I stood there on the hill in Griffith Park, look at this boulevard right here, all the way to the horizon, right? So this is a complete development over the entire LA basin from as far as the eye can see. Okay? What does that mean, right? When we talk about the Blade Runner scenario, right? What does that mean? That there was never an intention that we would completely do that, right? But we have. And what does that mean? Well, these are some of the raw numbers, right? And this is from 2014, so it's a little bit out of date. But we have 13.5 million people, roughly. Medium household income of $70,000, but a median property value of over $500,000. Right? So what does that mean? What does it mean when we have this type of sprawl? Well, look at how sustainability and sprawl relate to each other. This is the Atlanta area versus the Barcelona area. About the same amount of urban population, right? But look at the urban area of Atlanta as opposed to Barcelona and the urban density. So it's over, I don't know if it's 50 times more dense in Barcelona. So if you just used energy consumption as an idea of sustainability, like how much energy we're using, look at Atlanta versus Barcelona. Barcelona uses 1/8 of the energy that Atlanta does. So when you talk about sprawl versus urban density, you are talking about sustainability. Just not to belabor the point, cost per household. So, LA is considered to be a suburban city. It's how we were laid out. Single family home, 2.5 kids, 1 car, 2 cars, 5 cars, right? And urban is more urban centers, say New York, San Francisco, something a little bit more dense, right? So that's a difference. You're paying 3 times, a little bit under 3, 2.5 times more per household to live in that environment. So not only do we have population explosion, we're using more energy, it also costs more to live here. Right? So how does sustainability relate? We're using more energy, more waste. So that's how urban planning and density and sprawl relates to sustainability. Now, think about it in terms of social equity, right? Our homeless population is one of the worst in the country, right? We have 60,000 people out in the street, right? Think about that median income versus what our housing prices are, right? So it's all related to each other. And this is what we're dealing with in terms of the modern day Los Angeles, right? It's this. So let's talk about a little bit about how we got here and what does it mean, okay? So back in the turn of the 20th century, so that's 19th century? Yeah, turn of the 20th century, right? We had all sorts of ideas of how we were going to move people. Now, the biggest thing was that when we thought about cities back then, we talk about cities in terms of economic drivers. So the people of LA or the people who developed LA were not thinking of sustainability. They were thinking about how they were going to attract people here to LA so that it can be an economic power like San Francisco was, and how we can make a lot of money by being in the city, right? And that was the main driver of those ideas. So we need to sort of keep that in mind without judgment, right? But there were all sorts of ways you could move people, right? So these are the men, right? You had Otis and Chandler, LA Times, who were the big developers. They were the power of the city. You had Henry Huntington, who brought the train in. He was railroad. And William Mulholland, who would bring in water. You put this all together and you have the stew that is modern LA. So, for example, Mulholland brought in the LA aqueduct, brought in the water, and just out of nowhere, Chandler and Otis bought land all in the valley that was all along the aqueduct, right? And then sold them off as subdivisions. Lots of money, right? But you have to say, why that was very, very smart of them, you have to say that they were the drivers in development of the city. So, if you were in Philadelphia or New York or even Chicago back in the early 20th century, cities were not that great places to live in. They were dirty, crowded, not a lot of open space, and disease-ridden, you would say. That was an aspect of our Industrial Revolution, New York in particular, right? So if you were living in those conditions and you decided, someone said, look, you can come out west to LA and you can own your own home with land around it. For the same job that you're doing in Philadelphia and New York, that was great incentive to come here. And think about what the American dream is, right? The American dream as we define it now is a single family home, 2.5 kids, 2-car garage, right? Think about that. And that was marketing people to come over here to LA, right? And this is what you get. This is Lawndale in the South Bay. You get these huge tracts of land of single family homes, not particularly efficient. And how do you get people from here to a central place? Originally, like something like this might have been an airplane factory back in the 30s or the 40s during World War II. But as these factories as you started to get people that lived around it, they started to be in other places around Southern California. So you had to move people who live here to other places around Southern California. And how did you do that? You did it with our freeway system. You dismantled the train system that we had, and you made freeways. And these freeway corridors became all of these areas around the freeway corridors, excluding the central core of LA, all of a sudden became very valuable land. Again, people making lots of money on this land. So where you decided these freeways should go, decided on how much money those developers could make building single-family homes. So this is what's called a suburban model. And not only did we develop it here in LA, but it was been copied all over the world. Atlanta, we just saw, copies this exact model. And to a point where we start to talk about it as the American dream. But think about it. We could have chose anything in terms of transportation. It didn't have to be the single occupancy vehicle. It was not inevitable. When you talk to a lot of people out there now, especially from Southern California, and you say, well, I want to get rid of the car and do more pedestrians, do more bikes, they look at you like you're crazy because they don't know anything else. It's never inevitable that the car was going to be the main reason. The single occupancy vehicle was going to be the main reason of transportation. We chose that based on this model. The fact that we chose that made our design ideas inevitable. Once we decided that we were only going to use the car, all the design and everything you see around the city now is designed for the car. So it's not inevitable, it was a choice. And I want to make that perfectly clear, it's a choice. So we can unchoose that about how we live. Right? It's not a God-given right. People talk about the good old days. There never was a good old days. We've had traffic forever, ever. It's never been a successful model. You know, and don't have anybody tell you anything else. But we looked at it as progress, that an American dream, the American way. I just love this postcard. This is a postcard of our freeway system. Can you imagine? They were selling this for 10 cents or 5 cents or whatever. That's how proud we were of this freeway system. A system that never really worked. Right? We have the worst traffic in the United States, by far, if you look at it this. Now, Washington, D.C. Sometimes beats us every year, you know. Yeah, Washington, D.C. But we are number one for most years. That's 81 wasted hours that we are in traffic. Okay, from an economic driver, think about what that means. Worst air in the country, worst traffic in the country, worst homeless problem in the country. So if you go back to Chandler, you go back to Otis, you go all the men that envisioned how LA was going to be put together, these are the byproducts of those visions. Now, there are all sorts of good stuff that they did. Of course, LA is one of the richest cities in the country, in the world. You know, is a great economic driver. We manufactured most of the planes in World War II that helped beat the Japanese. There are all sorts of good things about LA, but we still have the worst air, sustainability-wise, the worst traffic, the worst homelessness in the country. Okay? So then why not widen the freeway? Can anybody answer these questions? Why couldn't we just widen the freeways?
Pretty expensive, right?
It is very expensive, but if it relieves traffic.
Space?
Yeah, that's space, but you can always do eminent domain and buy all the land you want. China does that.
It wouldn't actually solve the traffic issue.
Why wouldn't it solve the traffic issue?
You would just put in more vehicles and an alternative.
Very nice. It's called induced demand. And this is a thing of it. So you have highway congestion, the public says, we need to widen the freeway. You widen the freeway for billions of dollars. Travel is easier, so it incentivizes people to use the freeway more. Right? So the studies out of, I think it was the University of Michigan, was saying that 5 or 6 lanes both ways, so that's 10 or 12 foot right of way, is about the max you can do before it starts to get really difficult to exit and enter the freeway, as well as and it doesn't do much good in the traffic. Now, by the numbers, we have a local example. Everybody remember Carmageddon? Remember the 405? Remember that pain that was the 405? These are the numbers. 2 lanes added. 18 bridge replacements. Took 6 years to do it. It opened, I think, 2014 at a cost of $2 billion, right? This is a 2007 Thanksgiving, and we keep seeing the same image every year about Thanksgiving. The travel times from the west side to the valley is exactly the same before they did everything. And this opened in 2014. Induced demand. It's actually worse. The travel times are worse now. So we just spent $2 billion. It didn't do any good whatsoever. So when people talk about not spending money on high-speed rail or metro light rail, think about, okay, would you rather spend $2 billion on that or $2 billion on this in terms of how long or what benefit it is to the people in this city? Induced demand. So this isn't theory. It was theory back in the 1960s. It is not theory anymore. Widening freeways, while for safety reasons you need to do it, and a rising population you probably need to do it more, and you need to put in carpool lanes, is not going to solve our traffic problem. So how much money are you willing to put into it? You as the taxpayer. Right? So that's supposed to say here. Where do we go from? Okay. So the suburban model is you, the home, and the car. You go from, work. Work, home, and the car. You go from work to home, you use the car, or you could put entertainment in here, you get in your car, but this is the trifecta, right? This is what we're talking about. You get in your car and you drive around. So what we're talking about is what happens if you eliminate the car from this equation? What does it look like? Right? And most Angelenos would just, it's like, oh my God, I can't do that. But there are other cities. I stopped renting a car when I go up to Portland. I just stopped. It made no sense for me to do that anymore. The TriMet goes right into the airport. It takes me right to downtown Portland. I walk to my hotel, and then everything around my hotel is restaurants, bars, movie theaters. I don't need to go anywhere else. And if I did, I could always use Uber. Or I could get back on the TriMet. There are other models around the world and around the United States that doesn't involve necessarily the car. But we as Angelenos only think in terms of that. Right? So this is the car, right? There's about a 20-mile radius that you can go anywhere. We just picked sort of a random spot in Southern California. And this is the attraction of the car, right? You have the freedom to go anywhere you want within the 20-mile radius of wherever you are. That's the freedom, right? What happens if you talk about rail, right? You talk about rail along a single corridor. You don't have the option to roam everywhere you want, right? But think about it from a sustainability point of view. If your main mode of transportation was along that particular transportation corridor, all your goods and services would have to be along that corridor within a certain amount, right? So this is first and last mile. I think you've heard that before. Within a mile radius, you would have to have all the businesses and all the services that you would need because you're going along this one corridor. Think about how that city would look like as opposed to what our city looks like. If you only had a choice where you were along the corridor, you are basically shrinking down the density of the city. Right? Now, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's not like we're saying that we should go out to the suburbs and demolish all the single-family homes. That's never going to happen. We put in $3 trillion of equity in the suburbs. That's not what we're talking about. But think about what a transportation corridor does for you. Right? So that little area in there, that's the island of Manhattan. Okay? Look at this Southern California. The downtown LA is that big. This is all of Southern California. Remember that picture that I showed you of going out into the development as far as the eye can see? That's what we're looking at here, right? And look at the density differences between the island of Manhattan and LA. So that is along the Wilshire Corridor. They're now building the purple line that goes to Santa Monica and Westwood, right? And yes, Westwood at the end there. Think about what that transportation corridor can achieve as we ran out of land. We've already run out of land, and the Californians expected to be at 50 million by 2050. So we're going to have to put people somewhere. So when we talk about density, we're talking about creating density here in LA along these transportation corridors. And this is in China with HDR engineering drawing. It can be done. What does a dense Los Angeles look like? So we talk about stuff like complete streets. So not only designing streets for the car, but designing streets for all modes of transportation, right? So transportation and the cars have just overtaken everything else as the #1 greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. That happened in 2016. Okay. So getting cars off the road, if you are into sustainability and talking about greenhouse gas emissions, getting cars off the road should be one of the things on your bucket list, right? And the way to do it is starting to take back our streets to other modes of transportation. You know, transit-oriented development. So this is in Pasadena, where you actually are living close to the transit that you need. This is a streetcar in Kansas City. Bus rapid transit. If you can't do rail, perhaps you do dedicated bus lanes, like the Orange Line going out to the valley is a bus rapid transit. And they're talking about skyways. One from Union Station to Dodger Stadium, one from Warner Brothers up to the Hollywood sign. Skyways. So, a complete street allows pedestrians, slows down traffic, allows bicycles, and is overall a fairly safer experience than currently how we design our streets specifically for the car. So one of the things also we're top in the nation is pedestrian deaths. It's not really safe out there. You see those horrific accidents and pedestrians getting run over in the nightly news all the time. I don't know where I cannot find that slide. I don't know where that actually came from. This is along the LA River. This is the bikeway along the LA River. So what if, from a sustainability point of view, and being a landscape architect, what if you could do pedestrian bikeways that also was a natural bikeway? So you're talking about green infrastructure going through the middle of your city, right? So one of the things that we have problems with is open space. Per open space, we have some of the lowest open space per capita in the United States. You know, what if we could redo the LA River so we do have this open space? So you do have wildlife corridors. You do have a place to filter all of the air pollution. And at the same time, it acts as a transportation corridor. So when President Obama came in 2014, he landed at LAX, and there was a group of bikers who biked. So he took a motorcade from LAX up to Glendale, and there was a bikers that started at Long Beach and biked up this corridor and made it to Glendale before he did, to prove a point that this could be a viable transportation corridor. So what we're talking about is not only, you saw that diagram with that the holistic, all these different things going into sustainability. What we're really talking about is a complete community, right? Where we're taking into account all of the different aspects of it. Of course, it probably is a pipe dream, but it's a dream I think worth pursuing, where we are talking about it holistically. So not only we're talking about you being able to get to work or school on time, but a healthy community, right? An equitable community. So, what does life look like without a car? Well, we're not really talking about that. We're talking about the car will still exist, suburbia will still exist. But what can we do that makes living in dense communities as attractive as living in the suburbs? So we're not getting rid of the car, but we're adding all these different elements around this particular diagram to make a more complete community and a more sustainable community. Things that we didn't think about before. Why is it that it is only the car that allows us to do transportation? So that's the way transportation and sustainability intersect. And it's a very important aspect of any kind of talk about sustainability here in LA in particular. So instead of the single family home, garage, 2.5 kids, perhaps you could still have that, but perhaps you can do just as well if you choose to in a more dense community. And how do we create that here in LA? Okay, so what can you do? There are a lot of people thinking about this here in LA, a lot of people. So our county, LA County Sustainability Plan was just released a few months ago, end of last year. You know, you're interested in sustainability, read this plan. Support what you support, change what you want to. It's up to you guys. It's up to us who live here. And you're quite a bit younger than I am, so it's up to you guys. What world do you want to see? LA City has their new Green Deal, LA plan. Comprehensive, right? They have been, they've released this for public comment, I think for the past, I don't know how many months now. Have you commented on it? Perhaps you should. If you're interested in sustainability and you're sick of traffic, perhaps you should get involved. Perhaps you should look. Okay? This is what you can do. LA is for you. You're the future of LA. It's up to you, if you want something different, an outcome to be different, to get involved and make it different. It's up to you about what Los Angeles looks like in the future. Okay? So thank you. I'll take questions.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting and engaging. Any questions?
What are some of your favorite cities? When you look at cities that are good models for a more sustainable, integrated community.
Well, I'm going to go right up on there and say that LA is one of my favorite cities. It's actually one of my favorites. Yeah. But if I'm looking for models, right, and nobody does it like perfectly, but certainly if you look at the models of how over the last 40 years cities have invested into their future. So they've either taxed themselves or they got fundings from grants, but they invested into public transportation, like BART in San Francisco, right? Like MARTA in Atlanta, or the Dallas rail system, right? You can see the difference it makes as population starts to gain up, right? So as LA started to go crazy, right, we started to gain further and further out. We have the most extreme commutes in anywhere. People, 3 hour plus is considered to be a extreme commute, and we have people doing it all the time, right? Think about how many cars are in the road in there. You can see the difference in models of how that makes a difference. So if you look at Portland, you look at older systems like Chicago's system. You look at San Francisco and BART, right? You look at those cities and what they invested in the 70s and how their cities look now. You can get an idea that if we invest in our transportation system, what our city might look like in the future. You know, how that density develop. And then we can, those are models, right? We can correct the mistakes that they made. Atlanta made a huge mistake by just abandoning the MARTA. You look at San Diego, who had the great trolley system and just sort of never pushed it at all. You can see those are lessons learned, right? The lessons of how we can take those lessons and make them better here in LA, right? And make it work for us. So I don't really have a favorite city. I am actually from San Francisco, but LA is my home. So, other questions? We could talk about anything you want. Yes?
So how do you see the difference between the urban landscape of a city like LA and the idea of central business district like London?
So London is pretty spread out too. But what I think we're talking about with the slide of the cities of LA is we're talking about what is actually happening in LA now is that you have areas where there's a central interest, right? Like Silver Lake, for example. You have areas of economic development and central interest. What if you started to increase density along those nodes, right? And then you have a corridor, some sort of transportation corridor, rail being preferable, or it could be a BRT, where all the businesses along that central, along that corridor will now create this more vibrant urban environment. Right? So people who want to move to the city don't want to go home and sit in front of the TV, get back in their car, drive to a parking lot, work, and then do that every day. Okay? Not that I'm saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that the people that move into the city want the experience of being able to walk out their door, go to a restaurant, go to a bakery, get a cup of coffee, go see a movie within walking distance or biking distance. You have a whole group of people who want to just go back to their home, their single-family home, and go watch TV, or then go out to a Denny's or whatever, have, suburban living. I'm not saying we should replace one or the other, but right now it's not equal. The only way that you have upward mobility in this system is if you have a single-family home. I just bought one. I have rented all my life. I just bought a single-family home. I have access to money I never had before. I have people soliciting me for money. Right? I can't do that as a renter. I can't do that as a dense environment that I used to live in. So they're not equal. So how do we make them equal? That's all I'm saying. We got to incentivize the denser environment of people who want to live there, so they can afford to live there. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I'm not sure if I did or not.
That was
Yeah.
good. Follow-up question. You mentioned Portland, Oregon. What do you think they did in terms of promoting the bike culture that we don't do here in LA?
Well, actually, LA, we're doing very well. Ciclavia has made a big difference in terms of how people view biking. Certainly, I've lived here for 12 years now, and certainly when I first moved here, the bike was nowhere to be seen. People thought you were crazy if you ride a bike. It's not like that anymore, so it is changing. But I think for what Portland had the advantage of already having sort of a central area. Their downtown, unlike other cities around the United States, never really died. Downtown LA died. Downtown Stockton died. Even downtown Chicago died when you had the white flight and you had the sprawl that was happening away from the city centers, right? Portland, it didn't happen that bad. And same with San Francisco, it didn't happen that bad. So they were able to think about how the city would look like in the long term, right? If people decided that they wanted to come back into the city centers, what would my city look like? Well, I have a BART train, right? Regional BART train that goes all the way out to Pittsburgh, in the East Bay, that brings people into the city, I'm going to pay to make that happen. LA didn't want to put any money into anything else but freeways for years and years and years. So only when Measure W passed in 2004, I think it was, 2005, when we agreed to tax ourselves. Every other measure had failed on that. And that's what happened to Atlanta. Every measure for increasing public transportation in Atlanta has failed, including the last one, which was 2016. And they have horrendous traffic problems in Atlanta. Horrendous, right? And why? The American dream. We only want to think of the single-family home, the 2.5 kids, and the 2 cars. That's what we aspire, right? But think about everything else that we could aspire to that's different from that your quality of life could be the same or better, right?
Questions?
Actually,
Yeah.
I have a comment. I think the Olympics are coming up in, I don't know.
2028.
2028, yeah. Pretty sure that there's going to be some kind of transportation boom or updating of.
It's already happening. Yeah.
So I guess I was wondering, do you think that it's going to be based on a nodal system as you were talking about, or do you think it's going to be something different?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, and I'm going to kind of go in a different direction here. All the decisions that are being made, that what you talked about now, is happening now, right? Or has already been made. So you have to plan for a transportation system 10 years in advance, right? 20 years in advance. BART in San Francisco didn't get to the airport for 40 years, right? So to answer your question, yes, all the stuff that I showed you here is the current thinking around transportation in LA. The general public are not quite on board, right? But the transportation thinkers are all figuring out how they want to put things together. So what I'm saying is that if you want to get involved and influence how LA is going to look by 2028, you get involved now, because all the decisions will be made. They don't make, it takes, the regional connector has been, they've been trying to put that together for 5 or 6 years now, right? They have slated in Measure M, which passed just in 2016, I think it was, they have slated a bus rapid transit system to go on the street right where I live in Glendale, right? But that's not going to happen until 2035, right? I'm trying to count about how old I would be in 2035. So these things are important to deal with them when they come up for your future generations, and that's what sustainability is about, right? Nobody in this room is going to be alive in 2100 to see if we were able to make it or not, the human race, right? You won't be alive. So if you cared about what your great-grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren, and everything else, all future generation is still going to be able to be alive by 2100, you have to care about that now. And that's the same way with transportation. You have to influence your people, the people who make decisions now for subsequent generations. So, yes, they are setting everything up right now. There's a thing called 28 for 28. So 28 projects that they're trying to get done before 2028 Olympics. All the projects that I mentioned, the regional connector, all of the different rail systems and the improvements of the freeways are all connected to get the athletes from one place to another in Olympics. And all that decision making is happening as I'm speaking right now.
So you also mentioned, I think you said something between the community, transportation, and the homeless, like the homeless situation. And you mentioned that as you condense an area into a smaller density, wouldn't you say that would increase housing, and then therefore would push people out of that area?
No, so our problem is that we haven't built enough housing. So now that we have taken up all the land from Southern California, there's no more single family home tracts that are close enough to any of the city centers that makes a difference in terms of affordable housing. So where are we going to put housing? We don't have enough now. We're 50,000 units short. So we have to go up. I mean, density is going to happen whether we want to or not. The question is, how do you make it high quality density and put it in places where it makes a difference in people's lives? So putting a high-rise housing out in the Antelope Valley, and then shipping all the homeless people over there is not the solution, right? Oh, it might be a solution if you want to just ship people off to there, but it's not. There's no city center there. There's no way for them to get back and have jobs there. There's no way of doing that.
Yeah, what I'm saying is it becomes more dense, right? So wouldn't housing go up? I mean, it's the same thing in Manhattan, where prices go up and then all of a sudden you have communities just dissolving because people can't afford it.
So here's the thing, right? So you're talking about gentrification and displacement, right? Which nobody has actually solved yet. But think about gentrification and displacement. Gentrification and displacement is about home ownership or land ownership, right? If you own the land or the building that you stand in, you don't have landlords that will put a rent too high that then displaces you out of it. So when we talk about gentrification, we're actually talking about equity in being able to own the property. And it's a very American value. We really shouldn't even be discussing that. The problem is that owning land and developing property has always been the avenue for the elite. People like you and I do not have the opportunities that those people do to develop and own land. in any kind of scale whatsoever. So what type of models are we talking about? The only thing we have available to us is buying a single family home. And once you buy a single family home, that becomes your number one thing of wealth in your life that you can then trade. And if you wanted to go up a level of economic, a level in economics, is your house, right? That's the model, right? How can we take that model and make it into a more dense environment, right? So you mentioned Manhattan. Manhattan has something called a co-op, right? A co-op means that you don't own the unit like a condominium, you own percentage of the building itself. Now, ironically, the reason why they did co-ops was they were trying to keep minorities out of buying buildings in Manhattan. But how it's actually phased out after the last 150 years is that it's actually a pretty interesting model. You own 5%, and that 5% represents a 1,000 square foot apartment or something like that. You can buy more into the co-op if you want a bigger apartment, or buy less into the single, but you own it. You own that percent. So there isn't a landlord that says, oh, I'm going to raise your rent to market value. You were paying $600 a month, I'm going to make it $2,600 a month. So you're absolutely right. All things being equal, if we just make things more dense, that's not going to help. You're absolutely right. So we have to think of other models besides a single-family home that allows us to have the ability to be able to have equity. Questions? About anything?
It can be a question of your future career path, right? A question about their future career path, how if they want to get into design or work as a design engineer or consulting or construction.
You mean how would you go about doing
Yeah.
that?
Right. What do you recommend would be the best? Probably not the best, but their option after college.
So, as civil engineers, in today's climate, you are not going to have a problem finding a job. Okay, so let's talk about this again, right? Okay, so there's this whole debate in this country about private versus public funding, right? So for the last 20 years, we've been saying, oh, we don't want to pay taxes. They waste our taxes. We don't want to put money into public. We want everything to be private. Everything should be private. Private does something so much better, right? We've been having this debate, right? Why, if you look back at actually what is actually happening, right? Why is LA right now in a complete and absolute construction boom, generating billions of dollars? People from all over the world building here, construction jobs like you wouldn't believe. You as civil engineers could find a job anywhere you wanted, with any level. Metro, if you want to go public, contractors. I know that they're stealing civil engineers from each other right now. How did that economy happen? It didn't happen by privatizing everything. I tell you right now, it happened because we passed Measure W and Measure M in the last 10 years. And there's $330 billion going into the system that you and I are paying for with a quarter-cent sales tax. Okay? So, in my opinion, you could tell which side of the aisle that I fall down on, obviously. Don't let anybody tell you that public investment isn't worth it. Okay? Now, it can be not worth it. I mean, we can have this whole debate about high-speed rail. But done right, we are basically recession-proof for the next 20 or 30 years. And we did it for ourselves. Right? We taxed ourselves. I'm very proud of us. 67% we needed to tax. We Measure W, Measure M passed by 70%. Right? All the other places around the country, that was unheard of, taxing yourself. You never tax yourself. You reduce taxes. Right? We tax ourselves. So we are, for that foresight, we reap the benefits. So you guys, as civil engineers, honestly, get your degree. You're at this point in time in this world, the way it happens here, with our transportation system, $330 billion, you're not going to be of want of a job, honestly. But do well, right, obviously. Get your license, be in engineering and training, do that sort of stuff. And you'll be fine. Other questions?
I guess that was the best way to
End it all?
end it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank
again.
you.